I texted them from the airport, arriving at 11:40. Gate 6. Mom misses you. 14 months in a military hospital. 11 surgery. And somehow, I made it back. But no one came. Not my son Michael. Not Vanessa, the daughter-in-law whose children I had helped raise. I sat there in my uniform, surrounded by laughter and flowers and banners, watching families fold into one another while I stayed apart. Maybe they thought I'd never come home, that I'd disappear quietly in some sterile ward, but I survived. And what happened next I've never told anyone until now. I had imagined it differently after all the nights of silence, the hollow rattle of machines, and the sound of my own breath echoing against hospital walls. I thought someone would be there. Not balloons, not brass bands, just a face I knew, a voice that reminded me I was still human. Instead, the only welcome was the hiss of automatic doors and the chill of airport air. I had asked for one thing, just one, a message like a mother who still had a place in her family's life, arriving at 11:40, Gate 6. Mom misses you. That morning, a nurse with gentle eyes had wheeled me to the transport van. She looked uncertain when I told her I'd be fine. I lied. Under my coat were stitches that still pulled against fresh scars. 14 months. 11 surgery. And I had learned not to walk never that again, but to shift. To balance. To live on wheels. Gate 6 was a blur of flowers. Squeals. And homemade signs that said welcome home. None of them were for me. He sat for 47 minutes. I counted every one. The driver offered to wait, but I waved him off. Pride shows up even when your legs don't. Across from me, a couple argued about whether their flight was early. A teenage girl wept into a poster. A toddler screamed "Daddy" and flung himself into a man's arms. I swallowed down the sound that rose in my throat. My hands trembled when I checked my phone again. No response. The signal was fine. The time was right. The message had gone to the right name. Everything was in place except the part where anyone cared. I had 2 sons. Michael, the oldest, married to Vanessa, too polished, too cold, a woman who could make you feel foolish with just a phrase. She once told me to move on from old ways when I said I preferred paper checks to online banking. And then there was Daniel, Kieter, a step behind his brother, polite enough to call on birthdays or text when reminded. Never disrespectful, but never brave enough to defend me. Neither of them came. Not even a sorry. Not even an excuse. Just silence. The wheels of my chair squeaked as I turned toward the taxi stand. The driver blinked at me. Surprised. I gave him the address, and he opened the door. I didn't ask for help. We drove in silence. Outside, summer trees crowded the roadside, leaves loud and green, flags at half-mast for someone I had never met. The world kept moving, as if I had never been gone. The road out of the airport was framed by summer trees, their leaves loud and green. Flags at half-mast for someone I would never know. The world kept moving, but not with me in it. My name wasn't carved into anyone's memory anymore, certainly not in that family. When we neared my house, I asked the driver to stop 4 blocks early. He looked puzzled, but I pressed a 20 into his hand and said nothing. I needed distance to see it from afar. The house looked the same, at first glance, pale blue paint, white trim. The flag on the porch faded, but still there. 2 cars in the driveway. One was mine, or at least it had been. Vanessa had told me she would stay there while I recovered. Said it was practical. Said they'd maintain it for me, and I believed her. Foolishly. From behind a hedge, I watched a woman step out in my robe. My robe. She held a glass of wine, laughing into her phone as if she had lived there all her life. The porch lights clicked on automatically. Someone had reset the timer. Piece by piece, they had claimed my place. I didn't cry. I wish I could tell you I did. That it hurt enough to spill out of me. But what I felt was sharper than grief. Cleaner than sadness. I felt hollow in a way that begged to be filled. If you've ever been erased by the very people you built your life around, maybe you'll understand what came next. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't knock. I turned away and rolled into a different part of myself, the part that knew how to wait, how to strike, how to take everything back without raising my voice. Sometimes being unwanted is the greatest freedom there is, and I planned to use it. They never said it aloud, but their every move told me the truth. They thought I would never return. That night I paid cash for a room at the Maplewood Inn off Highway 42. The walls were thin. The mattress sagged. But no one knew I was there. And for the first time since landing, I had space to think. The next morning, I went not to the neighborhood bank where tellers once greeted me by name, but downtown where no one knew me. I asked a clerk to review activity tied to my house. Mine, she scrolled, then paused, eyes flickering in a way that told me before she spoke. Something was wrong. Withdrawals I hadn't made. Transfers I never signed. A new savings account under a trust name that felt uncomfortably familiar. They had used my power of attorney, the one I'd signed before surgery when Michael swore it was just in case. There it was, not theft, not fraud, but betrayal. Neat, documented, legal, while I was learning to breathe again. They were rearranging my life on paper. Vanessa moved into the house 2 weeks after my second surgery. By the 5th, Michael had rerouted the utilities and changed the title on my second car. I kept my face steady, asked the clerk to print statements, slid them into a manila folder, and left as if I were running errands. My next stop was Robert Hayes, the lawyer who had once handled my late husband's affairs. His office was as clean as I remembered, his eyes sharp as ever. He blinked when he saw me, said they had told him I was in critical condition, that he hadn't expected to see me again. Then he showed me the trail. Emails from Vanessa, forms carefully worded, notes about my declining cognition, requests for assistance with succession planning. They weren't waiting for my death, they were rehearsing it, preparing to bury me while I was still alive. Robert leaned forward. Cautious, he said he hadn't acted on anything yet, that he was waiting for something official. But they had been circling, waiting for silence, hoping for it. That silence ended the moment I walked into his office. From there, I went to the storage unit I had rented years earlier after Daniel's wedding. Inside, dusty boxes, the deed to my grandmother's cottage in Maine, a locked tin with copies of every legal document I'd ever signed. I unfolded a chair and sat in the dim light, page after page, hunting for leverage, for my name, for what was still mine. By the time I finished, the sun had dropped behind the hills. I drove back toward the coast and parked 2 blocks from the house that used to be mine and watched through shadows, through windows left cracked open in the evening breeze. They laughed. They poured wine. They lived as if the woman who built that life had never existed. My grandchildren were inside. I heard one of them call for Vanessa, not Mom, but something close enough to twist the knife. The next day, I chose a lawyer myself this time. Young, sharp, quick-moving. Her name was Lauren Mitchell. She didn't blink when I rolled into her office. She had seen cases like mine before. I laid everything on her desk. The power of attorney papers, the account statements, the trust forms, the messages. She studied each page, nodding as she turned. She said we would begin with immediate revocation, freeze assets, force reviews, reassert ownership. But what stayed with me most was what she said near the end. This isn't just about property. This is about identity. They erased you on paper. Now it's time to write yourself back in. Within 48 hours, we filed everything. I told no one. I let the legal tide move first, quiet but heavy, rolling in like the moon pulling water. But legal revenge was only the beginning. Reclaiming what they stole wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel it, to know it, to sit in it the way I sat alone at gate 6. They thought I was gone. Now I would show them what it looked like when a woman they buried too early rose back up and I wouldn't knock. The legal wheels were set in motion, slow but steady. Still, I knew better than to rely on paperwork alone. Some wars are fought in court, others in silence. Mine would be both. I stayed at the Maplewood Inn off Highway 42. Every morning I left before dawn and came back late. Invisible. Quiet. I didn't want them to know I was back. Not yet. I began mapping their routines. Michael left at 8:15 sharp. Navy blazer pressed. The phone welded to his hand. Driving my silver sedan, the one I bought outright when I turned 65. Vanessa Linga Longa? Her gym schedule was sacred. She left around 10 in yoga pants, returning 2 hours later with smoothies only for herself. Sometimes she wore my old scarf, the one Richard had given me for our 35th anniversary. She didn't wear it like it meant something. She wore it like she owned it. The children were dropped off by a nanny. Not warm, not gentle, just bored, even while tying a shoe. I doubted Vanessa even knew the name of their homeroom teacher. By the end of that week, I knew everything. Who came, who left, which deliveries arrived, which friends stopped by. They had turned my home into their command post. What they didn't know was that I still had a key. One copy, hidden years ago, inside the back of an old recipe tin. I used it, late one evening, when the lights were out. I rolled quietly down the side path, careful to avoid the motion sensors. I had installed those sensors. I knew their blind spots. The key slid into the lock smooth and silent. They hadn't changed it. Not because they trusted me, but because they'd forgotten I existed. Inside, I moved like a ghost. My room was unrecognizable. The photos gone. My books packed away, replaced with wellness guides and essential oils. The kitchen smelled of basil and bleach. The china I had inherited from my mother gone. I opened drawer after drawer. Nothing familiar. Then, on the hallway table, I saw it, a stack of envelopes. One was addressed to me. From the retirement board, an annual benefits notice. Unopened. Left sitting for weeks. If I hadn't come, they might have thrown it away. I took it. Quietly. And more than that, in the office drawer, I found the living trust paperwork. The original, not a copy. I slipped it out and replaced it with a decoy slightly altered, just enough to spark confusion if they tried to use it again. Then I left, as silent as I had entered. The next morning, I made my move. I reached out to the community liaison at the local Veteran Support Centre, a woman named Angela Morris. We had crossed paths years ago at a fundraising event. She remembered my name. She asked if I was all right. I told her I wanted to make a donation, not a large one, but for something specific: transitional housing for female veterans recovering from surgery or injury. She froze, then admitted they had been dreaming of a project like that. There was already a waiting list. A real need. I told her I could offer my house, but not immediately. It was tangled in legal disputes, occupied by family under false assumptions. Clearing it would take time. She listened carefully, then said words that cut to the bone. Most people don't give away homes unless they're trying to reclaim themselves. She wasn't wrong. I left that meeting with a deadline. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to take back what was mine and turn it into something no one could ever steal again. In the meantime, I worked quietly. I made calls to old friends, a retired judge from the neighborhood watch, a notary who owed me a favor, a former neighbor who now sat in the county records office. I didn't ask for much, just confirmations, quiet checks, discreet updates, piece by piece. I gathered my ground. Then I sent a courier with a formal notice to Vanessa, a gentle reminder that her occupancy was temporary, the deed under dispute, that she should prepare to move. I imagined her reading it, wineglass in hand, smirk slipping. That night, Michael called me. The first attempt at contact since my return. He left no message. I didn't call back. By morning, Lauren Mitchell had filed motions to freeze the house against any sale or refinance, and to revoke the power of attorney. Legally, they were cornered. But emotionally, I hadn't touched them yet. That would come later. For now, I watched from across the street. My house still stood, but I wasn't inside. Not yet. And when I did return, it wouldn't be through the front door. It would be through fire. I didn't send the invitations myself. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I asked Angela to arrange them through the Veteran Center's event coordinator, under the pretense of a commemorative dinner honoring long-term donors. That part was true. I had made the donation. What no one knew, least of all Michael and Vanessa, was that this dinner was also a stage. A test, and I wasn't just hosting it. I was waiting. The dinner was held at Hamilton Hall, right in the heart of Portland. Not fancy, but historic, the kind of place where stone fireplaces and oak chairs gave dignity to simple things. A long walnut table stretched the room, dressed in linen, candles flickering in glass holders. It looked nothing like the house I had built and been erased from. I asked Angela to invite my family as plus ones under their own names. I wanted them to feel casual, smug even, off guard. I wore a navy dress, modest but tailored, my hair tied back. I looked like someone's retired schoolteacher, an old librarian, ordinary, forgettable. No one would have guessed that beneath that calm exterior was a woman who had spent 14 months in military rehab, endured 11 surgeries, and learned to walk again with metal where bone used to be. They arrived late. Vanessa first. Then Michael, always one to make an entrance. I watched their eyes scan the room for familiar faces, trying to piece together why they had been invited. They didn't see me at first. I sat in the middle of the table, speaking quietly with Helen Brooks, a veteran widow who had lost her husband in a roadside bombing overseas. She knew what this dinner really was. Vanessa's voice soon sliced across the room like too strong perfume, loud, grating, laughing at something meaningless. Michael drifted in behind her, nodding at a few guests as though they were staff. It took him 3 minutes to see me. He froze mid-step. Not dramatic, just a flicker, but I caught it. He hadn't expected to find my face waiting across that table. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I simply looked. When the host announced dinner was served, I waited for my moment. It came after the soup was cleared. When the lights dimmed and the event coordinator rose to introduce a long-time donor, a decorated military widow who had helped launch a new housing initiative for wounded women veterans. My name was spoken clearly. I stood. For the first time in over a year, every head turned toward me, not with pity, but with respect. I want to thank this community. I began, not for what it gave me, but for what it allowed me to reclaim after being discarded, forgotten, replaced. I found myself again through service. And tonight, I returned something that was never meant to be hoarded. I paused, turned slightly toward Michael and Vanessa, though I never said their names. Over the past months, I have established a legal foundation that will convert a residence into transitional housing for disabled female veterans. That home on Riverside Drive will no longer be held by private interests. Tomorrow morning, eviction notices will be served. The deed has been reassigned. The locks will be changed. The legal work is complete. Um, a ripple of gasps passed through the room, but my voice stayed steady. Some of you may know the house. I lived there for more than 3 decades. It was taken from me under false pretenses while I underwent life-threatening procedures alone. That ends now. I sat back down. No applause followed, only silence, sharp enough to sting in the teeth. Michael looked as though someone had struck him. Vanessa's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Helen Brooks leaned close, whispering. That was cleaner than a sniper's shot. Dessert was served before they approached me. Michael came first, leaning in, his voice low. You set us up. I set the record straight. I answered. Everything else you did to yourselves. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice like broken glass. You're ruining everything for no reason. I turned to her. Steady. You sold my husband's watch online. You wore my scarves. You sat at my table and called it your home. It isn't. They left in a storm of angry silence. Coats half-buttoned, pride bleeding through every rushed movement. I didn't follow. Instead, I stood once more, thanked the guests, and walked out with Helen. In the parking lot, I saw them arguing next to my old car. They didn't know the registration had already been revoked. By morning, the plates would be pulled. Let them drive it one last time. Let them feel the wheels turning beneath them as though they still belonged, because the next chapter would be worse. I had already filed for fraud, perjury, and unauthorized occupancy. The paperwork would hit by Monday. Tonight, though, I had done what I came to do. I had reclaimed not just a house, but my dignity, and I did it in front of the very people who thought I was too broken to rise again. By Monday, the storm had already begun. At exactly 7:30 a.m., a uniformed officer handed Michael the envelope while he stood in the driveway. Coffee in hand. I knew, because Angela had placed a volunteer nearby to document everything. The message came through my phone. It is done. Michael had always paraded that house as though it were built with his own hands. The truth? He never laid a single brick. Every inch of that home came from my salary. The savings I guarded. The sacrifices I made after Richard passed. Vanessa, of course, wasted no time redecorating, stripping the photographs, the military plaques, the quiet dignity that once lived there, and replacing it with a magazine spread of herself. By lunchtime, the legal filings hit. Fraud, perjury, misappropriation of property. They had used my absence as a window to move papers, but the forged signatures, the revoked power of attorney, and the sudden asset transfers raised too many red flags. My attorney, Frances Wilk, a quiet woman with the precision of a playwright, had prepared everything as if she were scripting the final act of a tragedy. By Tuesday, their accounts were frozen, pending investigation. Vanessa called my old neighbor, sobbing about harassment. The neighbor called me. I told her gently, there is no harassment, only accountability. I kept my routine. Physical therapy twice a week. Volunteering at the community kitchen. But every day, another layer of their scheme unraveled. Loans taken out against the property in my name. Personal belongings sold online. Vehicle titles shifted while I was unconscious in recovery. What they didn't know was that Angela's volunteers had already gathered screenshots. My bank flagged suspicious logins traced back to their devices. Every time they swiped one of my old credit cards, they left a trail. By Thursday, the sheriff's department delivered a court summons. The hearing would be held the following month. The charges weren't criminal yet, but the civil penalties alone would gut their savings. One mistake too many. But even then, I wasn't finished. What I wanted wasn't revenge. It was reckoning. That Friday, a message lit up my phone. My grandson, 22 now, in college. A kind boy once, before Vanessa whispered poison into his ear. He wrote one line, "Grandma, I didn't know. I'm sorry." I read it twice, then deleted it. Some wounds don't heal with apologies. Some require the clean removal of everything infected. That night, I sat inside my rented Laurel Street apartment. Modest, clean, quiet. The heater worked. The faucet didn't leak. I made tea and watched the sunset paint the glass orange. I thought about the old house the day I carried Richard across its threshold after his last deployment. The piano by the window, the one I sold the week after I came back because its keys reminded me of laughter I no longer heard. It wasn't my home anymore, not because they had taken it, but because I had given it up to something bigger than myself. To women like Helen Brooks, who had nowhere else to go. To women who had faced bombs and bullets, and now faced custody hearings and eviction notices of their own. Michael and Vanessa would leave eventually. Once the court forced them out, they'd retreat to some rented condo far from Riverside Drive. They'd call it unfair. They'd twist the story. But I no longer lived in the version of the world where their opinions carried weight. I had started sleeping with both legs elevated. Doctor's orders. The pain still flared at night. But I could bear it now. Pain was no longer a warning. It was only a memory. The next day, Frances told me a reporter had caught the scent of the case. She asked if I wanted to make a public statement. I declined. Let the facts speak. Let silence thunder louder than their excuses. Because I knew something they didn't. The moment the locks changed, their power ended. And when power ends, so does control. They had tried to erase me from my own story, but I had rewritten it in ink they couldn't wash away. And this was not the ending. This was only the collapse before the calm. I would be ready for what came next. It was the last Saturday of the month. The rain had stopped, but the pavement still shone like a mirror. I walked slowly up the steps of the house that no longer belonged to me, not legally, not emotionally, but through my attorney. I had requested one final meeting, and they agreed. Frances offered to come inside, but I asked her to wait in the car. This was mine to face alone. Vanessa opened the door. She was thinner than I remembered, her face drawn tight, not with age, but with bitterness. Her eyes swept over me from head to toe, as if I were a ghost that refused to stay buried. Without a word, she stepped aside. I entered the living room. The couch was new, the rug replaced, but the old scratch on the wall where Michael, at 6 years old, had hurled a toy truck that remained. Some things outlive paint. Michael was already there, sitting with a manila folder in his lap. He looked older, drained, his shirt wrinkled, shoes untied. The power had started to seep out of him the day the sheriff placed that envelope in his hands. Now it was almost gone. He rose, opened his mouth, then shut it again. I sat across from him. The air between us felt cold despite the heating. My voice was steady. "I'm not here to listen. I'm here to speak once." He nodded faintly. "I built this house not with hammers." I said, "But with nights I skipped dinner so you could eat seconds. With jobs I worked while your father lay dying in my arms. And you signed it away while I was under anesthesia." He said nothing. Vanessa leaned against the wall, arms folded. I continued. "I was gone for 14 months, not on vacation, not on a beach. In a military hospital, my lungs collapsed twice. My legs broke again. And not once did you come. I sent flowers." Michael muttered. "They died in 3 days." I said, "I stayed alive." "Oh." The silence stretched. Heavy. "Every dollar you moved. Every document you forged. Every lie you fed your children, I have it all. Emails. Bank logs. Witnesses. I know who coached you. I know when it started. I know everything. Oh, his eyes flinched. He had counted on my death. But I came back. I said, not just to survive, but to remember and to reclaim. Vanessa's voice finally cut through, sharp as glass. We did what we had to. You abandoned this family. I served this country. I answered. I paid the mortgage from 2 states away. I raised your children while working 10-hour shifts, and still blamed myself for being tired. You never understood, she snapped. I understood everything, I replied calmly, especially when I read the text you sent Michael the night you filed the quitclaim deed. I have it. You wrote, it's finally all ours. The old bird won't last the winter anyway. Michael's hands trembled. He didn't look up. You didn't just betray me, I said. You desecrated what this house stood for. And now, everything that came from my hand will be turned away from yours. Oh, you've humiliated us already? Vanessa hissed. Eviction court. The neighbors know. Oh, good, I said. Let them. Maybe they'll think twice before handing over power of attorney to a son who signs in the shadows. Michael finally lifted his head, his eyes wet. You could have just talked to me. I stared at him. My son, the boy who once cried over a broken toy truck. Now the man who signed away his mother's future for a lake view. I did talk, I said. For years. You just stopped hearing it. The clock ticked on the wall. The wind pushed against the windows like a whisper. I stood. This is my last visit. Not to this house, to you. Oh, Michael rose. Unsteady. You're cutting me off entirely? I'm restoring the order you violated. I said. If that means distance, then yes. Consider this, the last chapter you get to write in my book. Oh, Vanessa scoffed. You think anyone respects what you've done? You're just a bitter old woman in a rental. Oh, I stepped closer, leveled my eyes with hers. No, I'm a woman who gave everything, and finally stopped giving to the wrong people. Oh, I walked out, closed the door behind me, and didn't look back. Frances was waiting in the car. Engine still running. She didn't ask how it went. She simply handed me an envelope with the final filings inside. Everything was official. As we drove away, I looked once more at the house in the rearview mirror. The porch light flickered, the windows fogged, and for the first time, it looked empty not from the furniture, but from the souls who no longer belonged there. That was the day I buried what was left of them and stepped fully into what was left of me. 2 weeks later, I moved into a small cottage at the edge of Cedar Creek. It had once been the guest house of an artist who died without heirs. Frances helped me buy it outright. No mortgages. No liens. Just a title in my name and a brass key that felt heavier than it should. The cottage was modest, but it faced the water. Every morning, I heard the soft lap of waves and the calls of birds with no memory of betrayal. It didn't replace the home I had lost, but it carried no ghosts. That was enough to begin. Out back stood a locked storage shed. Inside, Frances and I stacked every box of evidence we'd collected: signed transfers, notarized statements, bank logs, attorney memos. Not just for court, but for the record, for the truth. But that wasn't what this day was about. Today, I was going to see someone I hadn't spoken to in 23 years. Father Lorenzo still ran the Oak Ridge Community Home, a place where I had once volunteered briefly before Michael left for college. Life pulled me away back then. Now, the home sheltered single mothers, aging women with no family, and veterans with limited mobility. I brought a modest donation, enough to cover 3 months of utilities. With it came a letter, the first step in a quiet shift I had planned in silence. Over the next 10 days, I visited 4 more centers, one for housing assistance, another for adult education, a third for women navigating probate law without guidance, and finally, a farm co-op run entirely by widows who had lost their pensions to predatory guardians. To each, I gave the same kind of gift, unrestricted funds. No strings attached. Save one, transparency. And with each gift, I left a letter. In it, I explained what I intended to do with the final portion of my estate. For years I had prepared, refined, and hidden documents to ensure nothing would ever fall back into Michael's or Vanessa's hands. What they didn't know was that the house and accounts under dispute were not the sum of my worth. The brokerage account they thought they had drained was only one piece. I had cash reserves offshore, under a trust name Michael never learned, and government stock options from decades ago that had finally matured. Together, it amounted to just under $2, $4 million. Not a fortune by billionaire standards, but enough to redraw lines on a map. Frances helped me file the paperwork, though not through her own firm. Too visible. Instead, she connected me to Margot, a former compliance officer who now specialized in surgical legal disentanglements. Margot didn't flinch when I laid out what I needed. She drafted the documents with the precision of a scalpel. We named the new trust after my mother, the Viola Legacy Fund, a woman who had raised me with 2 aprons and no time, who never owned property but never bowed her head either. The fund was built to activate in stages. The first wave of funding would go public in the next quarter. Press releases were optional, but I knew word would spread. Frances made sure of it. She still had friends in the city who owed her favors. One blog post from a former editor friend was all it took. It didn't need to trend. It just needed to land in one inbox. Michael's, by the 3rd week, a soft buzz had already begun in non-profit circles. Headlines whispered, "Former military widow launches trust to support vulnerable women." "Quiet donor reverses, inheritance plan to empower communities." I didn't read them all, just enough to feel the ripple. Then the call came. Frances answered and put it on speaker. Vanessa's voice tight, sharp, angry. She said she'd seen something online, asked if it was me, demanded to know where the money came from. Her tone made assumptions. Frances didn't respond beyond one line. "All inquiries can be directed to legal counsel." 2 days later, Michael called. I didn't answer. I let him leave a message. He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He just said my name 3 times, each one softer than the last. They were beginning to understand. This was never just about reclaiming a house. It was about rewriting what family meant. Not hierarchy. Not blood. But presence. Who shows up? Who answers when you're sitting at gate 6 at 11:40 after 14 months in a military ward? Who doesn't flinch when your body carries metal where bone used to be? That week, I wrote one more letter. No legal. No signatures, just a handwritten note to the board of trustees overseeing the fund. Make sure no woman has to beg for her worth to be recognized. And if she must fight, give her sharper weapons than silence. Oh, by month's end, my name appeared as sole founder. The family line was cut, the legacy redirected. And somewhere, in the fog of everything Michael and Vanessa had lost, I hoped he would finally see. This wasn't punishment. It was revelation. Not everything that dies becomes dirt. Some things become seeds. And I had just begun planting. It started with a headline: "Local hero turns tragedy into triumph." Beneath it, a photo of me standing beside a small wooden sign, "Viola House." I had forgotten the camera crews the day we opened the doors, never expecting the footage to air during the morning broadcast. But it did. By 10 o'clock, my inbox was flooded. Messages from strangers, women, grandmothers, single mothers, veterans, survivors. They thanked me. They asked to volunteer. They offered supplies, donations, stories. I read every one, and for the first time in years, something in me stirred back to life. At 10:37, the phone rang. Melania. I didn't answer. At 10:40, 3 emails arrived from Grady's law firm. One marked urgent, one labeled retract. The third, a shaky attempt at negotiation. They wanted me to clarify that the house and assets tied to Viola House were unrelated to any disputes. They called it a misunderstanding, offered to settle quietly, to make it all go away. I read their words like I was skimming an ad for a broken appliance. Unfeeling, disconnected. And they knew that was all that mattered. By noon, reporters gathered on my street. They weren't aggressive. They didn't even knock. They filmed the front of Viola House, left flowers on the steps, a bouquet of wild violets tied with twine, with a note, for the one who stood back up. That evening, a local news segment aired. They called the project an unprecedented act of private generosity built from pain but planted in resilience. They didn't mention my name. They didn't have to. My neighbors recognized me, people from church, the library, the park. They smiled when I passed. They waved. The next morning, 2 things happened at once. The IRS filed a review of assets transferred by the Nichols Family Trust, and the bank froze the shared business account Melanie had used for her expansion plans, the same account she and Grady had siphoned rent payments through, pretending I was still the owner. Someone, somewhere, had filed an anonymous complaint. I sat on my porch with coffee, watching bluebirds dart across the garden. Sunlight touched my hands. They looked older than I remembered, softer, steadier. At noon, Melania appeared. She didn't knock. She stood at the edge of the walkway, arms folded, jaw clenched, her hair undone, blazer wrinkled. She didn't call my name. She didn't take a step closer. I waited, sipped, said nothing, and she left. By week's end, the non-profit's website had logged over 50,000 visits. Viola House had a waiting list. The local university offered legal support and counseling interns. A grocer donated fresh produce every Monday. A retired nurse dropped off medical supplies. I kept to my routine, cleaning, taking calls, attending the monthly veteran support group, but I never spoke of my family. Not in public. Not even when they twisted the story. Then came the article. An anonymous leak exposed the trust transfers and the attempted asset manipulation. Grady's name appeared in bold, Melanie's in italics. Words like breach of fiduciary duty and intent to defraud filled the page. Their lawyers called it character assassination. But it didn't matter. The court ordered an audit. What followed was a slow, public unraveling. Melanie stepped down from her board seat at the business league. Grady appeared less and less around town. Neighbors stopped calling. Their son, the one they paraded at fundraisers like a trophy, was forced to withdraw his college application. Financial review pending. I didn't rejoice. I didn't gloat. What I felt was quieter than triumph, but sharper than relief. Vindication. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Because when I walked down Main Street now, people no longer looked past me. They saw me. They nodded. They smiled. And for once, my story wasn't a whisper behind closed doors. It was written into the town itself, stitched into the lives of women who finally had a safe place to land. I hadn't spoken a single word to the ones who tried to silence me. Not yet. The banquet came next. A rented hall at the far end of Cape May, only steps from the old boardwalk. The room shimmered with borrowed elegance. White linens, pale blue flowers, place cards embossed in gold. Grady had arranged the invitations himself, branding the gathering as a family celebration and realignment. As if renaming betrayal could disguise it. I arrived at 6 sharp, alone. My steps measured, deliberate. I wore the same navy suit I had, the day I first returned from the military hospital, tailored. Sharp, silent, heads turned, whispers followed. But no one spoke aloud. At the center of the hall stretched a long, silk-draped table, gleaming with crystal decanters and place settings aligned with surgical precision. Grady stood at the head, champagne flute raised. Melania, in an ivory sheath dress too tight for comfort. Linger beside him. Their smiles froze the instant they saw me. Grady's voice lifted, just a notch too high. He called it a new beginning for the family. Said that sometimes people lost themselves in old narratives, that what mattered was legacy. The estate, the future they had, all built together. Then, he said my name. I stepped forward, slowly. I didn't touch the microphone. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I placed a cream-colored envelope squarely on the table before him. My voice was calm. Even, this is the irrevocable donation statement. Transferring all my remaining real estate holdings, including the Cape House, to the Viola Foundation. Effective noon today. Oh, the room froze. Melanie made a sound between a choke and a scoff. Grady leaned forward, his brows tight. I kept my eyes on his. It includes the title, deed, and grant certification. I continued. The Board of Trustees has already assumed possession. There is no reversal clause. There is no executive challenge. And since the property was solely in my name, there are no other claimants. No one moved. No one chewed. No one sipped. The illusion of civility hung in the air like a curtain about to fall. There will be no inheritance battle. I said, no backdoor contest. The vehicles have already been auctioned. The funds reallocated. I paused. The only sound was the low hum of the air vents. Then I added, steady as steel. That leaves nothing. Grady's fingers curled at his sides. Melanie's cheeks flushed crimson. She leaned toward him to whisper, but I had already turned. At the far end of the hall, a small easel displayed a blown-up check, $243. Ling, payable to the Viola Foundation. Beneath it, the signature line bore my name. Beside it, I placed a framed photograph. Me, in uniform. On the day I first enlisted, I faced the room. This is what I leave behind. Not brick. Not keys. Conviction. That what is earned with dignity cannot be stolen with deceit. That what is broken can be rebuilt elsewhere. Ocean. A single clap broke the silence. Then another. Soon, reluctant applause rippled through the room. Not everyone joined, but enough. I didn't stay for dessert. As I left the hall, I passed Grady in the entryway. He whispered my name. I stopped, but didn't turn. You made this choice, he said. No, I replied softly. You made it the day you left me waiting at that airport. Oh? Outside. The night air was cool. My driver opened the door, and as we pulled away, I caught sight of Grady in the rearview mirror, frozen in place. Motionless. Like a man trying to rewind a tape that no longer existed. The sea roared in the distance. Steady and relentless. And I let it. The morning after the banquet, rain fell, not a storm, not thunder, just a soft, steady drizzle, as though the sky was finally letting go of what it had held too long. I sat at the small kitchen table in my cottage, a mug of tea warming my hands, watching droplets slide down the trees. No television, no music, only water falling and the quiet crackle of the fireplace. For the first time in years, my house felt like mine again, not a place of strategy, or planning. Our defense just stillness. I hadn't heard from Grady since that night, and I didn't expect to. Not yet. When people lose power, they go silent, and that silence is never out of respect. It is confusion, rage, searching for a new weapon. But I had taken the last one from him. I knew that silence well. Years ago, I used to sit with my husband in this very kind of room and wonder why the quiet felt so sharp. Now I knew it was the sound of people deciding who they would become without you. I wasn't lonely. I was clean. That day, a plain envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, a single folded sheet of lined paper. The handwriting was uneven, rushed, but I recognized it instantly. Viola. Her words were few. I saw what you did. It gave me the courage to leave. Thank you. No apology. No excuses. Just a declaration of movement. And for the first time in a long while, the weight behind my ribs shifted. She hadn't left because I forced her, or begged, or warned. She left because something inside her changed, and only she could do that. I placed the note beside my tea and smiled. That afternoon, I returned to the old beach house. I hadn't set foot there since I handed the keys to the foundation. But I had one more thing to do. The floors gleamed. The air smelled of fresh paint and citrus. The light fixtures I'd chosen decades ago still hung like sentinels. In the living room, near the empty fireplace, stood a woman, Vanessa Kane, the new coordinator of Viola House. Mid-40s. Sharp but gentle. She had once served in Navy logistics. Now, she devoted herself to helping women who had nowhere else to go. She didn't greet me with ceremony. She simply said, softly, "The first 2 residents moved in this morning. One's from Tampa. The other just discharged." I nodded. "The walls are strong. The ocean's good for healing." So are you," she replied, then handed me a small frame. Inside was a photo I had never seen me in uniform, standing before a cargo plane, perhaps in my 30s. My smile was tired, but steady. "We found it in the archives," she said. "Thought you should see what strength looks like." I brought the photo home and placed it beside my father's watch. That night, I slept without waking. In the days that followed, messages poured in from veterans, from journalists, from women too afraid to take the first step. I didn't answer most. Not yet. I needed the quiet a little longer. On the 5th day, Melania called. I let it ring. Her voicemail came brittle, stripped of the polish she once wore. "They froze our joint accounts. I can't pay the mortgage. You need to talk to the lawyer. Please." No anger, no entitlement, just desperation. I poured myself another cup of tea. 2 hours later, she called again. Then Grady. His message was only 2 words. "You win." But there had never been a game, only a test of who I would become when the people I loved forgot who I was. That night, I wrote letters not to them, but to myself. Letters about the cold corridors of the military hospital. About nights I lay awake, counting stitches. About the moment I saw Grady's name on a transfer document that moved my second car into his hands without permission. When I was done, I burned them one by one. Ashes curled upward into the fireplace. No bitterness. No hatred. Just release. At dawn, I walked down to the dock behind my cottage. The lake was still. A sheet of fog hovering over the water like a curtain waiting to be drawn. I sat at the edge, toes brushing the wood, and let the sun rise without interruption. No one asked me to explain. No one interrupted. I no longer needed to prove anything, and when the fog lifted, the horizon looked like possibility. Nothing left to claim, nothing left to lose. Only air and peace. By week's end, the headlines had shifted. Grady's name was no longer spoken alongside words like innovation or legacy. It was tied to accusations, frozen accounts, and bored government inquiries. From across the bay, I watched his fall unfold like a storm unraveling a fortress made of glass. He had built his power on my silence. Now that same silence was his undoing. I stayed away from the chaos, turned down every interview, declined the councilwoman's invitation to a charity luncheon, refused the magazine's request to feature me under the headline, "The Woman Who Outsmarted Her Blood." I wasn't interested in revenge tour fame. I had done what I came to do. Now, I wanted only to live. That Friday afternoon, a small envelope arrived, addressed in a hand I knew, the same handwriting that once scrawled birthday cards before it vanished from my life. Rosalie. Inside, just a few trembling lines. I heard, "I'm sorry. I don't know how to face you." That was all. But it rattled something inside me. A reminder, not all broken things are meant to be burned. Some are meant to be mended. The next morning, I sat on my porch with coffee, a cardigan around my shoulders. The air had cooled at last. The lake looked as though it exhaled after holding its breath too long. The breeze was soft, carrying the scent of leaves and damp earth. I closed my eyes and listened. I thought about the email chain Grady never deleted. The way Melanie's voice had sharpened when she realized the foundation gift was real, irreversible. I thought about the faces in that ballroom stunned, silent, and the glint of the plaque unveiled behind velvet. They hadn't known it had been installed 2 days earlier. None of it gave me joy. That surprised me. I thought triumph would taste sweet. But instead it felt hollow, like a house emptied at last of tenants who never paid rent. Later that day, I drove out in the old black sedan, the one with cracked leather seats and the faint scent of cinnamon gum in the glove box. I passed the ridge, left the city behind, let the hills fold into one another like cloth. I knew where I was going. Rosalie took 3 full minutes to open the door. Her hair was silver now, her navy sweater hanging loose. When she saw me, she froze. I didn't speak. I just waited. Finally, she stepped aside. We sat on the porch together. She poured tea without asking. Chamomile still hot, still the way she always had. Even back in the days when we barely spoke but shared silence while the children played in the yard. "They told me you wouldn't come," she said at last. I shook my head. That wasn't true. Not then. Not now. I didn't agree with them, she whispered. Not with what Grady did. I stayed out. I thought it wasn't my place. You had a place. I said, you left it empty. She nodded. A tear slipped from one eye and she let it fall. I hadn't come to punish her, but she needed to hear it, and I needed to say it. Eventually, we spoke of Sunday mornings and burnt pancakes, of the garage door that jammed every winter. Rosalie showed me a photograph of her daughter, my granddaughter. I had only glimpsed her once. Years ago, at a crowded 4th of July cookout. She looked like Grady, but her smile was softer, perhaps borrowed from her mother. When I left, Rosalie hugged me, not out of guilt, but out of grief. We had both lost years, and that kind of loss never truly fades. On the drive home, I rolled the windows down. The air was brisk, tugging my hair loose and stinging my eyes with water. But I welcomed it. It reminded me I was still here, still moving. That night, I slept without interruption. For the first time in months, there were no dreams of sterile hospital corridors or empty airport gates. Only the sound of water brushing the shore. Only the steady weight of blankets and peace. I asked for nothing more, not forgiveness, not redemption, just this, the quiet after the storm. And it was enough. The next morning, ocean wind rolled over the deck, salty and soft against my skin. As I stepped outside barefoot, the house was silent, as though it had finally exhaled. For the first time in years, there was no tension in the floorboards, no fear tucked into the corners of the walls. I moved slowly, not from pain, which had long been an old companion I'd made peace with, but because I wanted to take it in. The light, the stillness, the peace I had purchased with the price of my own clarity. The documents had been filed, notarized the day before. The Trust for the Women of Valor initiative was now public record. My name, mine, not theirs, would be attached to every scholarship, every training program, every shelter born from that fund. The beach house would soon host retreats and seminars for women who had survived abandonment, betrayal, and war. That was the life it would carry now. Not their lies, not their greed. I poured myself a cup of chamomile, the same blend Rosalie once brought me years ago. She had visited earlier, carrying warm cornbread and quiet eyes, the kind that see through you without judgment. We hadn't spoken much. We didn't need to. Sometimes silence is the deepest form of comfort, especially from someone who has nothing left to take. Word spread that Grady had left town. Some said he was staying with friends in Raleigh. Others whispered he had checked himself into a clinic. I didn't ask. I didn't follow. Let gossip carry that weight. Let the same people who once nodded politely and whispered behind my back be the ones to debate his fall. I had walked away from him, from all of it, not because I was better, but because I was finally done. A stack of letters sat on the corner of my table. They came from women I had never met. Some young, some as old as me. Each of them had read the press release or heard through a friend about the woman who rebuilt her life after being left at the airport, after being silenced, ignored, used. Each letter held a piece of my story reflected back. And somehow, in their words, I saw my own courage mirrored. I had never planned for this. I never expected to become more than a grandmother with a bruised heart and a stubborn will. But the thing about walking through fire is that sometimes other women gather near the light, and then they begin to walk too. The sun rose higher, casting a golden trail across the wooden slats of the deck. I leaned back in the old chair, the same one Grady once mocked as too wobbly, too worthless. I smiled. It still held me, solid, unbothered. In the distance, children played. I heard the splash of water, the bark of a dog, the echoes of life moving forward. Not mine to chase anymore, just mine to witness. I thought of Lillian, my daughter-in-law. I wondered if she would ever sit long enough in silence to hear her own heartbeat beneath the noise. I no longer hated her. Too much distance had stretched between us. Too much air. But I wouldn't forget. And I would never open that door again. Forgiveness isn't always about return. Sometimes it's about release. I finished my tea, picked up my pen, and wrote a single line in my journal. I am home. Then I closed the book and let the day begin. If this story has touched something in you, know you are not alone. Many of us have met silence where we longed for love, betrayal where we offered trust. But healing does not always arrive from others. Sometimes, it begins in the quiet moment we stop waiting for them, because in the end, it was never just about a house, or even a family lost. It was about dignity reclaimed, about learning that even after silence, betrayal, and years erased, we can write ourselves back into the world, not with anger, not with noise, but with the steady truth of who we are. And that truth, once spoken, becomes a shelter not only for us, but for those who will come after